Welcome back, everyone, to Open Line. We are talking about climate change. President Biden has implemented several policies that are a change and that are designed to help with climate change. And we are talking with Michael Vandenbergh. He is a professor at Vanderbilt, director of the Climate Change Research Network, and a law professor. And it was a fascinating kind of setup to all of this. Now we're going to start taking some calls. Let's go to Bruce. Hello, Bruce.
Hey, how are you tonight?
I'm fine. Go right ahead. What's on your mind?
I read a report where over 30,000 scientists disagree with this man is saying. There is different weather patterns. Sunspots, wobbling of the Earth on its axis, or actually our orbit sometimes can make a difference. I think that climate change, the way he's using it and others like him, they're using it as control, just like gun control. It's not about guns. It's about control, period. It's a moneymaker for these individuals. It's rhetoric to scare people. He's a pawn. They're using the vehicle of climate change for more governmental control. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Bruce. Thank you for the call. All right. You heard what he said. What do you say?
I'd like to respond. Sure, I'd like to respond. So, if you were listening carefully, what you heard is what I said essentially is this is not about government control. If you walk into a Walmart, you're walking into a store where the company has acknowledged that climate change is a real problem. And this is Walmart. We're not talking about, a coastal franchise or something like this. Is Walmart. And they have committed to 1 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So I think the most important thing to realize is that in the modern American society, we are deeply tribal right now. We're in two camps. And I believe that's destructive for the American democracy. But you're in a camp right now that you're getting your news from Fox News, you're in Facebook groups, you're looking at Twitter, and all that is telling you all the things you just told me. Every one of those are things that I've heard. I've given hundreds of talks on climate change. I hear all those all the time. And the problem is you're not getting exposed to the truth. What you're getting exposed to is what the group of people in your group are led to believe. They can believe, because everything that I told you is happening in the private sector. All the major automakers, all the major electronics companies, if you use Google, if you use Microsoft, if you use Amazon, you're using products from companies that have made this commitment and that are making these changes. And I frankly share with you, I grew up in the South. I consider myself a Southerner. I believe deeply in personal freedom and liberty. And I believe that if we want to have liberty and freedom in the long run, we cannot ignore the science. And you're simply wrong on the climate science, but I'm not going to debate you on that because I can't change your mind. I can't change your mind. All I can do is tell you that what is motivating most of the people who have the kind of views that you just mentioned is that they've been told a set of things that only people who are different from me believe those things. And what they're telling you is that in order to be conservative and to be a Southerner, you have to believe a set of things about the climate science. But that's simply not true. Many of the largest companies that are operating in the South are ones that have found this to be true and are acting in response. And that simply wouldn't happen if this is some lie. So what we really get to in many ways here is the concept of solution aversion. And I think you articulated it beautifully, and I'm really glad you did, because what you're saying is what you're really worried about is government control, right? And we've done research, and others have done research that shows that when people believe that climate change results in a big government solution, if they're conservative, they get less worried about the climate problem. They become climate skeptics. But what we found is when they hear about what the private sector is really doing on climate change, when they realize that it's not about big government versus small government, it's about reality, it's about private sector solutions as well, that even moderates and conservatives can get past the kind of messages that you're hearing from Fox News and other places. So that's my principal message. which is it is not about government control. In fact, government over the last 4 years was pushing hard against doing something about climate change, but the vast majority of all the biggest companies, including companies run by conservatives with conservative boards of directors, are doing something about climate change. And so you can believe that climate change is happening because you can believe that it is not about government control. It's about the private sector responding to a legitimate problem, just like the private sector would respond to a flood or a tornado or a drop in stock prices or whatever. This is just the next problem they're responding to. And we've identified hundreds of private sector responses to the very deep concern that we have about climate change. The last thing I would say is you have to think a little bit about which way you want to make a bet. Do you want to bet that what you're hearing is right and that all of these big companies are wrong? If you do make that bet, you're consigning your children and grandchildren for 500 generations to a really risky future. Or do you want to say, maybe there's at least a chance that they're right? And so let's do those things that are almost costless. Again, solar power right now is cheaper than the marginal cost of operating an existing coal-fired power plant in many places in the country. So why would you pay extra money to put your children and grandchildren at risk? I don't see it. I understand why, though. It's very understandable because, again, if you're in a certain place, you're just getting a message that people like me don't believe this thing. And all I can tell you is that's not true. Many people like you do believe this, and the best example of that is what we're seeing in the private sector and corporations and other private sector actors right now.
I'll ask some more questions about polarization and how we deal with it in a moment. I'm going to take some more calls here, but I think that's so important to discuss. And I'm glad we just got that call. Let's go back to the phones here.
Yeah,
let's go to David. Hello, David.
Yes. Let me start by saying that the last caller is an illiterate. He is just an illiterate. You cannot continue dumping pollutants in the air.
We don't want to call people illiterate, but okay. But all right,
it seems like he's not a scientist. He's not a technologist. We scientists and technologists, environmentalists, we know what's going on. And it has been documented, presented to the best academic sciences, and it's true. It's like dumping things in the water. The only reason why they are believing the water is because if you go and drink it, you will die. If water was in the air, if water that is on the ground is in the air, they won't believe it because they're not going to drink it.
Okay.
You can't be putting pollutants in the air,
right,
and say that it is good for humanity. It is not good for humanity, period. Because there are pollutants, and every person in the world agrees there are pollutants.
All right.
And the definition of pollutants are those things are harmful.
So do you want to make one final point here, or have you made your point?
Yes, I've made my points.
Okay.
You can't put pollutants in the air because pollutants have been proven
to be dangerous. Okay. All right.
So
go ahead.
Ben, there's a really interesting thing here, which, and I think this relates to our private caller. As you noticed, I never would say that someone was illiterate. I understand the emotion that gets worked up here, but people are working with the information they have. And one of the things that's fascinating is that many of climate skeptics have learned more aspects of the climate science than some people who don't know as much about climate change. The problem is they have engaged in two things that are really important that keep us from thinking rationally about this problem. One of them is called motivated reasoning, and the other is confirmation bias. And the idea is this, that people they don't start as a blank slate and just take in new information. They start with a worldview. They start with a sense about what's right and wrong and what group they're in and what group they're not in. And then they pick and choose the information that's out there to support their view. So there's some research that shows that some climate skeptics can answer more climate questions correctly than some non-skeptics. But the difference is they have latched onto facts that are the cherry-picked one-off occasional fact that's inconsistent with the whole view. And they did that because they were seeking some affirmation of this idea that they started with, that it can't be right, often for the reason that our prior viewer said, which is they're worried about big government. And again, as a Southerner, I get that. I'm worried about big government too. I don't want big government, but I really don't want climate change. And so what I find fascinating is that there's really it's not simply a matter of how much information do you have about climate change. It's a matter of what your identity is, or your sense of who your group is, and then are you willing to go out and pick and choose the facts that fit with and reinforce that view, rather than just gather new information to form a view as if you didn't already have an existing viewpoint.
Let's go to another call. Let's go to Jackie. Hello, Jackie.
Hi.
Go right ahead.
I was just wondering what rock all these people have been living under for so long that say there's climate change is not real. I mean, really, you got to be living under a rock to not see all the, the rain, the storms, the tornadoes, the hurricanes, the volcanoes exploding, the earthquakes, the droughts, the fires. You don't have to be political. I don't think they're literal. I think they're just ignorant and stuck under a rock to not see what's going on in the world. It's just not political, it's just what's happening. You see it with your own eyes. It's crazy people say there's no thing as climate change. So I wanted to say, the last one caller must not be illiterate. He's just ignorant and stuck under a rock. Thank you.
Okay. Well, so this is a very highbrow discussion from some of our callers here. We've got illiterate stuck under a rock. But they're on, it's very, we got two sides, emotional, all of that.
Yeah.
I'm being told we have to go to break, but do you want to quickly respond to what we'll say with something there?
I would just say that this is not unique to climate change, that we as a country, and let's talk about that maybe after the break, that we as a country are believing whole sets of facts quite differently, and we should talk about what that means for our democracy, because it's not just about climate change.
All right, we'll talk about polarization on this issue when we come back. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.